Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm going for the Joel Stein pretty boy look today.
Oh, yeah?
I think it's working for me.
I've actually seen him in person. This is the brilliant humorist you're talking about?
Correct.
But I really don't remember anything distinctive about his looks. What, do you have your hair slicked back or something?
Well, he just has, like, this flowing long hair. So.
I don't think he had it when I saw him.
And I have it until Thursday when I get my haircut.
Huh.
So there.
We should get him on Blogging Heads TV. Not that you're not an adequate substitute.
No, he'd be good. They bring in the chicks.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of on tenterhooks myself because I'm on jury duty this week, and I could still get called for tomorrow. Yesterday, I spent at the county courthouse, and what I think kept me from winding up on a jury was Blogging Heads TV. I was actually in the jury box. They had asked us all the questions, and I was still there, and there seemed to be no hope, and they were about to lock the gate. And then it was a civil suit, and the plaintiff's attorney said to me, the judge had asked us to stand up and say what we do and stuff.
Right.
The plaintiff's attorney said, can you tell me the name of these two websites you run? I said, well, bloggingheads.tv and meaningoflife.tv. And 15 minutes later, I was out of there.
Well, maybe it was Meaning of Life TV. They didn't want you to have a deep understanding of...
You laugh, but
dilemma.
I think maybe this guy thought, well, if I'm always pondering, ethereal, spiritual things, maybe I don't have much sympathy for young guys who are trying to fake a whiplash injury to extract millions of dollars from some poor woman. Yeah, and he would have been right, actually. I was not warming up to his client, and the guy hadn't even opened his mouth. But
well, see, he was a good lawyer.
He was a good lawyer. I mean, also, I think he was looking for, he was gunning for a blue-collar jury. I mean, the only two people who were reading the New York Times in the jury room, he bounced, me and some other guy. Make of that what you will.
Well, he dodged a bullet. Actually, he didn't dodge a bullet, but he dodged a long trial. I'm scared of getting on a criminal jury with a gangster.
You know what? Oh, no, I shouldn't say this. Never mind. Anyway,
Okay.
I was on a great criminal trial once, and then at the end it turned out I was an alternate juror and didn't get to deliberate. And they falsely acquitted him. They wrongly acquitted him. He was guilty.
Huh.
Okay.
So, I guess the first topic is Iran.
Apparently, yeah, you wanted to talk about Iran.
Did I? I'm the one who wanted to talk about it? It just seems it was on... it's in the news.
Yeah.
B, there's this Wesley Clark statement that the New York money men are pushing for a war. C, there've been all these events. There was we arrested these 5 Iranians at a consulate, I think, in Kurdistan, and then these 5 Americans were killed in this very sophisticated operation in Karbala, I think, where we are now thinking that Iran helped out the people who attacked us. And this 5 for 5 thing is suspicious. The fact that we captured 5 Iranians and then 5 Americans were killed.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because there was this story in the New York Times about, I don't know, what's the headline? Iran may have trained attackers that killed 5 American soldiers, U.S. and Iraqis say.
Right.
Now,
and it was very sophisticated. They had fake IDs.
And among the evidence that it may have been Iran is that it could have been a 5 for 5 tit for tat after we arrested their 5 guys, right?
Right.
Interestingly, though, I don't think that's even in this New York Times piece. And I learned that after reading the New York Times piece, the tit-for-tat thesis, and what I was struck by in this New York Times piece was the utter lack of evidence to back up the conjecture that it may have been Iran involved in this. And I've got to say, this story seemed to me eerily reminiscent of stories that ran before the Iraq War when various newspapers basically unwittingly served as propaganda outlets for the Bush administration, including the New York Times through the good offices of Judith Miller. And if you read this piece, I mean, look, the piece is kind of worth writing, but it seems to me the headline at most should be, Americans puzzled by sophistication of attack or something. Because there is no evidence whatsoever in this piece to back up the conjecture that Iran is behind it.
There was also that Time article by Baer, the ex-CIA agent, in Time magazine, where he speculated that this is an Iraqi Revolutionary Guard's group, sort of way of waging a proxy war of tit for tat. And he's an interesting guy. Did you see the movie Syriana?
No, I didn't.
The guy George Clooney plays is supposed to be this guy Baer. And
Yeah.
he's a very well-connected CIA Mideast operative who's sort of gone left. I mean, he's not a right-winger, and he thinks crazy people have taken over American foreign policy. So it's not like he's doing the Bush administration's bidding by raising this possibility.
No, I don't
and
think
he does have some
is.
experience.
But the New York Times piece was really thin for the headline that was sitting
No, I
on
mean,
it.
everybody's freaking out, but everybody's freaking out because it seems just like the run-up to the Iraq war, and everybody thought, well, gee, with Iraq, Bush will pull back at the last minute, and won't that be brilliant? And then he didn't. So everybody's worried that he's going to do it again. There was a big Francis Fukuyama article in a British newspaper about how
The Prospect, the magazine?
The Prospect. About how the neocons haven't learned their lesson, and they think Iraq is a great victory, and they want to do Iran too.
Actually, that may be a different piece than the one I'm seeing here, but go ahead.
Well, that was the headline of the piece. He never really got around in the excerpt they have to explaining how the neocons hadn't changed their spots. But there are all these signs that the Iranian front is crumbling, or that there are fissures opening up, and that the Bush administration is sort of responding to that. Maybe I'm just looking for hopeful signs, but there's this piece, this sort of initiative that I think it was Khatami initiated at Davos, where he sort of explored the possibility of cutting some sort of deal. There are these, signs that Ahmadinejad, the crazy prime minister, is losing power within the government, as if he didn't really ever have that much power, but he's losing his bid to amass more power. That people are upset that the economy is going down the tubes. The Iranian elites are upset. His faction lost in the recent elections, although it's not clear that the people who won were exactly liberal reformers. And we may be responding to that by, delaying this report on nefarious Iranian influence that would have been part of this Judy Miller-like build-up to war. Those are the hopeful signs.
Yeah, although it's important. An important question is how these changes in Iran are interpreted. What is it that's causing these seeming moderating trend, or and the associated drop in Ahmadinejad's stock within Iran?
Well, it's everything.
Well,
it's certainly the military part, because if the Iranian middle class is shipping its capital out of the country and causing inflation, and that's part of the problem.
Wait a second. It's certainly. Wait. Say that again.
In other words, the sanctions are playing a role. They're scared of the sanctions and the UN sanctions, but they're also scared of the prospect of military chaos, which is apparently causing a huge capital flight. And
but see, this
inflation.
is a good example of a perhaps too quick interpretation. I mean, you're following basically the Washington Post editorial line. Washington Post editorial page is of course, quite hawkish, and nobody beat the war drums louder in the run-up to Iraq. And in their recent editorial, that's exactly what they note the stock market is dropping and capital flight is accelerating, and they attribute it entirely to external pressure, some combination of American military threats and the UN sanctions. But there's a piece that you actually directed me to in The Guardian by, I think, somewhat subtler student of Iranian affairs whose name is Ali Ansari, and is at St. Andrews University. And he goes through in elaborate detail how Ahmadinejad's own policy screw-ups have led to some of the things you're talking about. For example, you talked about capital flight. Well, this guy notes that Ahmadinejad sponsored, a very loose monetary policy that drove interest rates down in Iran, and that tends to lead to capital flight because you can get higher yields elsewhere, okay? And it was also inflationary and so on. So, and this guy says in there, in this Guardian piece, there can be little doubt that U.S. hawks will interpret recent events as proof that pressure works and that any more pressure will, and he's right. You did, the Washington Post did. he says, yet the reality is that while Ahmadinejad has been his own worst enemy, the U.S. hawks are his best friends. In other words, if there's anything that can save Ahmadinejad at this point, it's George Bush, basically, and his kind of characteristic military posturing, which will tend to unite Iran behind Ahmadinejad.
I agreed with that piece. That obviously, if Ahmadinejad is failing, the one thing that could save him is if there's a military threat that unites everybody behind him. But there was a contradiction in that piece because he was, he does give credence to the idea that the pressure is part of what's hurting Ahmadinejad's standing, and then he says, but we should take off the pressure. No,
well,
I mean obviously the pressure is part of what's helping, and we should keep on the pressure, but we shouldn't invade Iran. I mean that's. It seemed to me it was a contradiction in his piece, saying, well, the Ahmadinejad's in trouble, so we should take off the pressure. How does taking off the pressure get Ahmadinejad in more trouble? I don't understand.
I'm not sure he's even saying take off the pressure. It's certainly a plausible model that, you ratchet up the pressure a little. And I don't deny that that's had something to do with some Iranian elites getting alarmed, for sure. But it's a totally plausible model that you ratchet up the military pressure a little and you get them alarmed. But as you sustain that, it makes it easier for Ahmadinejad to rally supporters, to rally nationalist supporters. And especially if you start actually engaging in more than threats and actual belligerent acts, if you start killing and capturing large numbers of people you say are Iranians in Iraq, or you start actually bombing or stuff like that. I mean, I took the message, one of the messages to be that nothing would do this guy more good than for us to actually bomb Iran. And that's not inconsistent with saying that what external pressure there has been, including both UN sanctions and an extra aircraft carrier here and there, have played some role in alarming Iranian elites.
Whose message was that we should bomb Iran? The Washington Post, you're saying?
Now, Washington Post is striking a somewhat more moderate tone than they were before the Iraq War. They're the second half of their editorial is, we should try some multilateral things and so on. But, they're relatively hawkish on this and relatively hawkish on lots of things. It's a hawkish editorial page.
This guy was hanging a lantern on the contradiction of his piece, where he's saying there can be there can be little doubt that U.S. hawks will interpret recent events as proof that pressure works. Yeah, that's right, because it is proof that pressure works.
Yeah, but he had earlier pointed out that a lot of the moderating influence in Iran had to do with other things, although he was not denying that some of it came from external pressure.
Right. Well,
he says the danger of overestimating the role of external pressure and naively extrapolating from that is that you wind up thinking more pressure is better without limit, up to and including bombing.
No, I agree with that, but some pressure is good, and he seemed to be arguing against keeping up the pressure. That was my problem with Mr. Ali Ansari. But I think we actually agree on this.
It's possible. Juan Cole makes an interesting point, and another thing that you actually alerted me to, which is that to the extent that Iran, one thing the Bush administration is playing up now is the nefarious role of Iran in Iraq. Well, first of all, Cole says if there's anybody that Iran is arming in Iraq, it's going to be the Badr Corps or the Badr Brigade associated with Skiri, which is actually as close as there is in Iraq to one of our military allies in a certain sense. In other words, they're not the Shiites we're fundamentally at war with. And he says some of these weapons may make their way to what is closer to being our Shiite enemy, the Mahdi army, or may make their way into Sunni hands, but Iran's not going to be giving them directly to those people. So
why isn't Iran capable of being very Machiavellian and giving arms to Sunnis who are blowing up our troops in the hope of fomenting chaos and getting us out of there?
Because Iran fundamentally is anti-Sunni. They want to gain turf for Shiites in Iraq at the expense of Sunnis.
But they could be practicing homeopathic warfare here. They could be, They could be giving Sunnis arms, which will provoke the Shiites into pushing them out and pushing us out. That would be a very Machiavellian, clever strategy. And why are the Iranians so sort of stupidly sectarian that, hey, we're never going to give arms to our enemy. I don't think Juan Cole knows that. I don't think we know that either, but it doesn't seem out of the question.
Well, they'd be cutting the salami pretty fine if they were calibrating things that subtly. I guess you can't rule it out.
Well, things are very confused. I mean, we're basically, Iran is on the side of the people we're supporting, as you note. Sadr, who is our main enemy, is the Shiite who is most anti-Iran. That's why the Sunnis like him. So that's a complication. We're sucking up to all these Arab Sunni regimes who are, in fact, supporting the insurgents who are killing us. It's not an area where there are no ironies.
It's not. Well, it's not a policy that didn't have internal contradictions to begin with. We were going to somehow it was going to be a democracy, and the people were going to immediately love us and love Israel and so on. The contradictions were built in, and then we were going to use it as a military platform to menace any country we wanted, and the Iraqi people would love that too. It was just an incredibly facile, policy from the beginning.
That was all a fantasy, but the question is why isn't this tightrope where we put some pressure on Iran but don't invade it the right policy, and a policy that has some hope of dissuading them from acquiring nuclear weapons, or that has some hope of at least modifying the government so that by the time they acquire nuclear weapons, it isn't the crazy Ahmadinejad government.
The only thing I object to is you're referring to it as this policy, as if that were the Bush administration's policy. Everything we know about the Bush administration supports the conjecture that ultimately they want to invade or bomb Iran. That's what the history of the Bush administration tells us. That when they do this and say we're just ratcheting up the pressure and we just want, more compliant behavior, actually they want to invade or bomb and will. I mean, that's just going by the historical record. So for you to say that is the Bush administration's policy seems to me like a real leap at this point.
No, I'd say that's a good
policy. The
policy
you outlined does not especially bother me.
People are rightly paranoid that we've heard all this before, and I, for one, thought that Bush would stop short of invading Iraq, and I was wrong. So at least I held out the wishful hope that he would. So, yes. And that may be why... that may be actually what's driving people like Chuck Hagel crazy.
Yeah. The threat of our military force, subtly, wisely, masterfully deployed, it could be a great thing. It's just that it is not in the hands right now that are capable of that kind of deployment.
It is possible that there are sources within the military who are telling people like Wesley Clark and Hagel that, hey, we're about to do something really irresponsible with Iran, and that's why they're acting so wild and crazy. With Clark saying that the New York money men are pushing us into war with Iran, and Hagel staging this stunt that he staged where he sort of dressed down all the other members of the Foreign Relations Committee for not being courageous enough in opposing the surge. And I took great umbrage at this because it seems to me, the surge has a chance, as we've talked about, of making things better. So why would Hagel choose this particular moment to go on an anti-war rant?
He's running for president, maybe.
And then there's this other explanation that it just happens to have, it helped him and got him a lot of dilatory media attention, and also short-circuited the campaign of Senator Brownback, who had also come out against the surge and was potentially stealing the anti-surge spotlight from Hagel. So there's a sound Darwinian explanation that does not have to do with being worried about a war in Iran to explain Hagel's behavior.
Well, there's also...
Hagel may be right. I just don't think he's that damn courageous for doing something that's going to get him showered with media praise.
Well, I don't see... Yeah, no. Well, let me just say one more thing about Iran. Is the premise of the administration is that to the extent that we can show Iranian influence in Iraq, I mean, this is the implied rhetorical premise, that establishes what a nefarious nation this is and how, they have to be dealt with harshly. I mean, who in their shoes would not be intervening in Iraq at this point? If somebody invaded Mexico,
exactly,
which we wouldn't tolerate in the first place, of course, but if they did, and civil war broke out, an insurrection, we'd have people in there trying to influence the outcome to our liking.
I agree with that, and I don't understand why. What is so terrible if Iran has a lot of influence in Iraq anyway? Obviously, they are going to have a lot of influence.
Yeah, at least they have a long-run interest. I mean, especially to the extent that Ahmadinejad's not running the show, and right now he seems not to be especially powerful. But at least they have a long-run interest in stability.
And as Ralph Peters, a man who you don't agree with very much, points out, Iran is further advanced politically than a lot of the Sunni regimes. They've had their religious revolution. They have elections. They have a closer thing to legitimate popular elections than any other Islamic state in the region that I know of, aside from Iraq. And so what's so terrible?
Yeah, no, that's a country that definitely potentially has a future as a free market democracy, a future, not a present. You know,
yeah.
It's at most a quasi democracy now, and but you know that it's a country with a lot of potential. It's also a naturally, organically unified country. Not a fake country that was created 90 years ago by the Brits.
There is this troubling thing that Amir Tahiri said, was that even though Ahmadinejad's faction lost in the elections, the people that beat him were actually just as crazy as he was, or just as radical and anti-U.S. as he was. They weren't liberal, you know, let's cool it establishment
I had
reformers.
not heard that. I had heard that they were conservative, a lot of them. But that this was, in any event, being taken as a referendum on him personally. I mean, these elections were at the local level.
Right. Well, there were two levels. There were a local level, and then there was election to some guiding council of brilliant people or something.
Okay.
We've reached the limits of my knowledge of Iran.
We exhausted my limits about a minute ago. But so you want to jump on Hegel now?
I failed in my transition to Hegel. So let's do it now.
So the recap is you're cynical about his motives in so adamantly opposing the surge.
I'm cynical, having been convinced by your book Moral Animal that we all have subconscious Darwinian self-interested motives, and his are pretty close to the surface here. He goes on this this emotional, semi-coherent rant. And he leads.
He does get pretty emotional, I've got to say.
And he leads the evening news. He's just as emotional as Barbara Boxer. I mean, we shouldn't be sexist about it. We should recognize emotionalism when we see it. And he's guilty of it. He's not the sort of guy you want to, not the cool analytic type you want as a president. He was thinking with his gut. So what's your defense of this guy? You've championed him for years.
Well, what I've said is if there's a Republican that I can support for president on grounds of foreign policy right now in the firmament, he's it. I don't know. I mean, you did this big blog item on him, you know, saying that ridiculing the meme that he is courageous because he's courageously confronting his party and so on, when in fact everything he's doing is politically convenient. Actually, I'd say two things. First of all, the blank is courageous meme is floated all the time. There's always some politician who's being courageous, when in fact, there's almost never been an American politician who showed really any political courage whatsoever. Just almost never happens. But for some reason, journalists periodically settle on someone they want to claim as courageous. But having said that, I would say, if he's running for the Republican nomination for president, I think he is being courageous, right? Because what he's doing does not seem optimal for that purpose, right?
Well, two arguments. First, he was never going to get the Republican nomination for president because he's been getting media strange new respect for years for pissing on Republican policies, not just with respect to Iraq. Second, there is sort of a tactical advantage in being the only anti-war candidate in a field of pro-war hawks, like McCain. So, you know, he could grab 15% of the vote or 20% of the vote. There are a lot of Republicans who don't like the war either. So it's not completely clear that it's that courageous, but he would obviously be setting himself up for an independent run, not a Republican run.
This is what Jim Pinkerton says in a piece in Newsday and said on yesterday's Blogging Heads, for that matter.
It's what Hegel said. He said, maybe I should run with Bloomberg.
He said that?
Yeah, as long as he was on the top of the ticket. He was joking, but he did raise the possibility. Yeah.
Bloomberg. But, well, we don't know anything about Bloomberg's foreign policy, I guess.
No. He's been a better mayor than expected. That's all we know about him. So, you know, I mean, McCain is arguably being courageous because he's sacrificing his presidential prospects to support a wildly unpopular policy in Iraq.
No, he's not. I mean, this goes back to like several months ago when he was saying we need a huge increase in the number of troops in Iraq. And I said, That's the least courageous position of all, because if there's one thing that's definitely not going to happen, it's a huge increase in troops of Iraq. Now, I was pretty close to wrong, okay?
He didn't take that route, right? You were wrong. He endorsed the lower level of troops that we have now, and he's
no. He's hedging his bets all over. I can find you a million quotes where he says, "I worry that this is not enough troops." He is setting himself up to distance himself from this part. He's saying this policy is better than sending no additional troops. He's also setting himself up to say this was not enough troops. Look, Mickey, rhetorically, he was boxed in. He couldn't reject the idea of an increase in troops wholeheartedly because, entirely because he had already endorsed that back when it seemed like the one safe position.
He could have done what Andrew Sullivan did, which is say, I have declared that 50,000 is the requirement, and this is only 20,000, so it's not enough.
That would have been too transparent.
He didn't do that.
Everybody would have been saying what I'm saying now if he had been that obvious about what he's doing. So that was not viable. He's doing the smart political thing. And why is it you're so pro-McCain here? You got to bend over backwards to defend this guy.
No. I actually agree with you about McCain. I think.
Well, no, but it's interesting. In your Hegel item in your blog,
I think he would be punished pretty brutally if he abandoned the war now.
In your anti-Hegel item in your blog, you also make fun of the way he says, I've been to war. I know what our men and women are going through there. And you say the "I've been there" meme is to Hegel, and in parentheses you put "and John Kerry," so you choose to make fun of both of them. Are you denying that John McCain has ever said stuff like this? He's never played that card?
He probably has. I'm not that pro McCain. I don't like McCain.
Anyway, the point is you chose not to include him in this item where you make fun of Hegel and Kerry for doing that.
Well, Hegel and Kerry did it. I don't remember McCain doing it. I'm happy to make fun of him if McCain does it.
It's all a question of who we choose to Google, isn't it, Mickey?
I was just thinking that McCain might be being courageous now because he's doing something that's unpopular. I agree with you that he's in a trap. Who's somebody who's doing something unpopular? Did Gene McCarthy do something unpopular? I don't even think he was that courageous in 1968 because there was a huge constituency waiting to greet him. But it was a little more courageous than anything Hegel's doing now. I mean, Hegel could have run against Bush in 2004 if he felt the pain of the troops being put in this meat grinder in 2004, and he knew that because he was a soldier. Why did he risk his career and run against Bush if it was going to save thousands of lives? Why didn't he have the courage of his convictions? Then he sat back and got good press on Meet the Press for sniping at Bush, and got a lot of grief from his Republican friends, but his popularity within his state still stayed up. He was right, but I just don't think he was so damn courageous.
You talking about Hegel or McCain?
Hegel. Why didn't Hegel pull a Gene McCarthy and run against Bush in 2004? That would have been a good thing to do.
No, but the one thing I will say about Hegel is his initial... I think it's clear that he had grave doubts about the war, some of which were expressed publicly. Yes, he caved. He like pretty much everyone in the Senate who doubted the war, he didn't have enough spine to oppose it in the Senate. That's true. But at least we can distinguish him from those people whose current opposition to the war is, so far as we can tell, a matter of political calculation, right? I mean, I don't know if Hillary Clinton was on the record with the kind of grave doubts about this war that Hegel was on the record with back then. I just don't know. But I know that there are a lot of politicians who are now, doing a lot of posturing against the war, and we really don't know what they thought in their hearts back when the war started. In Hegel's case, we actually do. Right. You can argue that he should have been a man of his convictions and voted against the war, fine, but at least he had the judgment to see it was trouble.
No, I'm all for his judgment. I just don't. I don't think it was that damn courageous. And the least courageous thing now is to oppose the surge as a sort of late inning makeup call that lets you say, well, I came out against the war at the end, when the surge is finally something that might have some chance of working.
Well, first of all, if it does have some chance of working, then it is courageous, because if you oppose it and it works, you look bad. Secondly, I don't even think it's...
No, that's not true. I don't think the people who are all these resolutions are sort of worded so that the people have an out if the surge happens to help.
Those asterisks aren't going to do them any good. They're on the record as opposing the surge. If it works, they'll be looking bad. The other thing is, I don't think it's even smart politics to succeed in derailing the surge, because then Bush can always say, and McCain will certainly say, we could have pulled it out of the fire, except for you.
Well, they're not going to succeed in derailing the surge, and they're not doing the things that would derail the surge. As Kate O'Byrne pointed out in the corner, if they really wanted to derail the surge, they could organize to vote against Petraeus. He's the guy who's going to run the surge. If you deny him the job, he ain't going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
But,
I don't think this is smart politics
either,
personally, precisely because people can make that criticism that it's just liberals being spineless again, right? That they really... That if they wanted to derail it, they could, and they're too chicken. I think what they're doing is not well advised politically.
It's not liberals who are seizing this life raft. It's Republicans.
Well, no, a lot of liberals. I mean, Republicans may be pivotal but there are more liberals.
But it's not that spineless for. I mean, it's not that spineless for liberals who've opposed the war all along to oppose the surge. That doesn't bother me.
No, it's not spineless. That's what I'm saying. Is it's actually not smart politics, so far as I can tell.
Yeah, I think it's wrong as a matter of policy, but I don't think it's spineless. I think. Anyway.
So we clarified that.
So are you for Hagel for president still, despite his incoherent emotionalism?
I don't know. I mean, I am a little disappointed in the way he's opposes. Not just the level of emotionalism, which I guess, I was thinking it was sincere, and now this week my thinking is maybe it's just, that it has a little to do with his presidential aspirations, and he just turned the volume up a little too high. But what really disappoints me is in what I've heard, his failure to kind of articulate really solid logic for being sure that this is going to fail. I mean, what I've heard is him saying, listen, the way morasses are is once you're stuck in one and you commit more troops, you just get stuck deeper and deeper and deeper. And this, of course, comes from Vietnam. And, of course, if we accept the premise that this is a morass, then the rest follows. But of course, there are differences between this and Vietnam. This is urban warfare, for example, and blah, 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 blah. So I would like something a little more crisply analytical from him. I personally think, the war was a mistake to begin with. It's going to end badly in one sense or another, and it's just a question of how bad. So it isn't like I think he's fundamentally wrong, but in terms of his level of certainty that the surge won't reduce this from a disaster of level 9 to a disaster of level 7, I'd like to hear slightly more clear analysis.
I agree. He may have that analysis, but he doesn't articulate it.
He has not shared it.
Yeah. Ironically, he's making Joe Biden look articulate. Biden gave this complete loose cannon interview to the New York Observer where he pisses on Obama and Hillary's Iraq policy and Edwards' Iraq policy. But he actually scores some points. And I'm segueing to Obama and Hillary here.
Well, this is a good sentence. Biden is so hopeless because that Obama quote, maybe it's out of context, but the sentence was something like...
He is hopeless, but go ahead.
It was something like with Obama last week. This is... It was as if he was saying this is the first articulate and clean, was another word he used, right? African-American ever to show up? That's the way it sounded, right?
No, I understand. He's a total loose cannon, and he's not going to get elected for that reason. But the other things he said in the interview were very useful. He said, how is capping the troop levels going to help? And if we get out, isn't that going to be a recipe for chaos? He's for partition, that he has a plan. So he can make this charge. Obama has set this introduced this resolution for this date certain. It really does remind me of the naivete of the liberals who said, well, if we withdraw from Vietnam, then we're going to be able to negotiate a solution. No, if you withdraw from Vietnam, you sacrifice your leverage and the other side wins. It seems, at least Biden is saying, yeah, but before we leave, we're going to set up a situation that's stable through some sort of partition, as says David Brooks, who's come around to that position. So
finally, Mickey, is it or is it not the case that by watching Blogging Heads TV, you could have gotten clued into the logic, the virtues of partition much earlier than if you had been reading David Brooks?
David Brooks's views today on Blogging Heads. That should be our slogan.
That's not exactly the advertising slogan I'm looking for, but I'll take it in this case.
Even though he's a loose cannon, Biden will be a good person to have in the debates. We learned in the debate in California with Schwarzenegger and Arianna Huffington.
He would be good as a foreign policy advisor who was never let out in public without a muzzle on.
Why should he be a good foreign policy advisor?
Because Biden thinks seriously about foreign policy.
He's spouting what his advisors tell him. Why not have his advisors be the advisor?
Okay, yeah, you could save yourself, I guess, a salary by doing that.
Why not have Tony Blinken be the advisor? But the point is he's good in a debate because he's going to make these points against Hillary and Obama, and he's going to do it, in characteristic Biden loose cannon fashion, and that's going to make those people defend their policy, and we're going to find out how they react and what they really think. Similar to the way Arianna Huffington in the California debate, made everybody react to her, and we found out, how they reacted. And it turned out people liked the way Schwarzenegger reacted better than the way anybody else reacted. So
maybe we should have a name for this role in a debate, the Huffington role or something.
No, that's right, and Biden can play that role.
Well,
the guy with nothing less to lose and just lets it fly.
On Obama, I now have like a positive and negative thought about Obama.
Okay.
The negative thought is what you just said. He's backing, I guess, this resolution that in a fairly binding way, right? Would have all our troops out in 14 months?
It has some outs. It says if the Iraqi government meets the benchmarks, and we decide it meets the benchmarks, that we can stay. It keeps a small force there even after the deadline. So it has some outs, but it's sort of
okay, but here's the thing. I mean, leave aside the policy wisdom of this.
Yeah.
As a political matter, I think he's misjudging the situation. He doesn't have to play this game. He's the one guy in this, on the Democratic side, who's a plausible candidate, I can't think of any others anyway, who was against the war from the beginning. He was on the record. Now, that was partly maybe because he wasn't in the Senate and so didn't have to cast a vote, but he opposed it. He opposed it. And so he is head and shoulders above these people in hunting for the Dove vote. He doesn't have to play this competing resolutions game with them. And if he's going to play it in ways that seriously complicate his prospects, either with moderates among Democrats or in the general election, I don't really see the logic of that. Okay?
I guess he's thinking short term, and he's thinking he doesn't have the nomination sewed up, but he has to win the nomination, and this hits the...
He doesn't need it short term.
The Democrats in their sweet spot.
He shouldn't even dignify the resolution's horse race. He should just sit back and say, unlike Hillary, unlike John Edwards, I oppose this war from the beginning. That's what he should focus on.
But think about this. Don't you think that if Hillary wins Iowa, she's won? I mean, she's behind in Iowa, right? So if she manages to win Iowa and then they have this big tranche of Super Tuesday-like primaries right after that, and she has all the money, she's going to win. So if Obama wants to win, he has to win Iowa. Okay? Maybe the press will try to keep him alive if he does a strong second, but I'm not so sure. And so he's feeling not on top of things at the moment, and he's going.
I don't think the winner of Iowa is guaranteed to win the nomination. No.
No, but if Hillary wins Iowa, I think she's on a roll.
Well, let me say anyway. The positive thought I have about Obama is what America needs really deeply in the wake of the next election is to have a very conspicuous rebranding. Okay, I mean we are in Europe and elsewhere. One thing people don't understand is why we reelected this clown.
Right.
And what we need for purposes of national security is to say to the world, this is a totally new page we're on now.
I agree.
We've seen the Arab... Nobody says that like a black presidential candidate, right? This is something fundamentally new.
People are so eager for us to be rebranded that it'll happen whatever Democrat gets elected. I can't think of a Democrat that won't succeed. Even, John Kerry would have rebranded us.
No, but it's not symbolically powerful the way Obama is. John Kerry looks like, he's out of central casting as just another American politician. Obama is like, we are repenting. We have seen the error of our ways. We're avoiding like middle-aged white guys for a while. That's how badly we feel about this.
I agree that he carries that message, but I think even Kerry, I mean, he goes to Davos. He's big on multilateralism. He loves the Europeans. I mean, they would have embraced him. And I think the biggest worry of either of them will be that people will so rush to say now America has changed that now they're going to have to say, hey, wait a minute, we're still fighting a war in Afghanistan.
We're still tough.
We're still tough, exactly. So
we still say if you're not for us, you're against us.
I just think anyway, that's what I think. Do we want to get into my defense of the word African?
Do so at your peril. It's one of the dopier things you've ever written, and there's a certain amount of competition for that particular Laurel, but go ahead.
I sort of retracted. I liked the word because it was a pun, and it was an efficient way.
The word Africans.
African, and it was used by some people, not in a pejorative sense. You can go to the web, and there are people who have embraced the word African, and they say, I'm a African American, and it's sort of funny, and it certainly if Obama said, hey, I'm African, it would reduce it would sort of pretty much cleanse the word of its opprobrium, but it's, as a friend of mine pointed out, it's very close to half-breed. It's used by people on the right to sort of imply that Obama is sort of half of something he's pretending to be. So I withdraw my defense of the word.
Well, can I go ahead and put a nail or two in its additional nail or two in its coffin?
Yeah, sure. You can beat me up anyway.
Well, I mean, first of all, as far as pejorative ethnic terms, we generally let the ethnic group decide what it is they don't like. It's not a lot of these ethnic pejoratives. It's not like they have intrinsically bad, denotative content. It's just that the people in question find them offensive, and we say, okay, we won't use the term. And that seems to me, and that a number of people of mixed ancestry of this sort are going to find that offensive. They're going to object. You don't have to do the experiment.
Well, we don't give.
Why bother? What's that?
You don't give us like a small minority a veto power over words you can
on
use.
Things like this, we actually traditionally do in our country.
No, but I mean, 20% of mixed race people take offense. Does that mean you can't use the word? I understand that if it's used systematically as a word, there's nothing inherently offensive about the N-word, but it's used with the intent to offend, so it becomes offensive. But if only, if I think there's also a phenomenon that people initially take offense to words, and then they become not so bad. Then they become sort of used in ordinary conversation, and they become not offensive.
Well, I mean.
I thought this was one of them.
The other thing is, you say, well, it's a kind of an efficient way to referring to these people who have, like a white parent and an African parent. And I would say, do we need a term for those people? I would suggest that, any term which to go around using properly, accurately, requires you to inquire as to the racial ancestry of whoever you're talking about. It's kind of almost intrinsically a bad, it's not really something I think the world needs more of. Is like, no, so wait, are you, or your parents this or that or this? I don't see why we need such a word. B, if you want one, there is one. I guess mulatto means of mixed ancestry vaguely,
is Tiger Woods calling himself Cablinasian? I think he calls himself.
Fine, if he wants to call himself that, that's
so his... if Obama wanted to call himself a African, that would be sort of
a funny thing. If he wants to call himself that, I would not object to him calling himself that.
We have a guy who's running for president who has this weird ethnic makeup, has written a whole book about he's caught between two worlds, and there is some evidence in the polls and in articles like Deborah Dickerson's that mainstream black Americans aren't embracing him precisely because of this heritage. So it would be useful to have a word that...
But, the other thing, Mickey, is, as I understand it, I could be wrong, but I certainly read that most blacks, who are not recent immigrants, in other words, most blacks who are descended from slaves, actually have some white blood in them. Have you not heard that?
No, that's definitely true, but
then
why,
the question of, why make a big deal about somebody who has, 50% as opposed to 20%?
People like Stanley Crouch and Deborah Dickerson, both of whom are black, hold it against Obama that he never went through Jim Crow and slavery and the civil rights movement. He doesn't have that cultural heritage.
That's a separate matter. That would be true if both of his parents were African. You're conflating issues.
Well, that's true, but it happens to be true of this people who are the children of white Americans who go to Africa and marry black people don't have that heritage. It's a subset of the people who don't have that heritage.
Yeah, right. It's a subset.
Well, but it's still useful to say what he is. He is something. It's a fact. And why can't you say it? But if it's used offensively as it seems to be, I'm not going to defend it.
If it's perceived offensively, why bother? I just don't see the value added.
It's a useful distinction to make because it's a distinction that people like Dickerson and Crouch are making. So it's there. It's a fact.
There are ways to make the distinction in the English language without using that word. They may involve more syllables. And if I thought this was a useful term for everyday conversation, for frequent use, I might be talked into finding a way to say it with few syllables. But I don't think it really is. I think it's an obscure realm of analysis that Stanley Crouch wants to engage in and should feel free to, but
it's not an obscure realm. Deborah Dickerson says the only thing that saves her with her and her friends is that Obama's married to a regular conventional African American. That she's
but
his
again,
wife.
That issue is separate from the fact that he has only one African parent, right? That is not the African issue.
That is the African issue. Why isn't that the African
issue? No, she would be saying the same thing if both of his parents were from Africa, right?
Well, right, but then he'd be another kind of person then he'd just be an African.
This just seems to me a perfect case where you have this contrarian instinct. I mean, you've already said you retract the item, right?
Yeah,
you just get carried away and you do this cute little item, and it's like...
It seems to me there's a possibility that in 5 years we'll be using the term African in a completely benign way.
If it's not perceived as offensive, that would be okay with me. I doubt that would be the case.
I'm not going to be the one pushing it. I just think it
because it does have the connotation that, I mean, one thing people in this category might feel is, as a practical matter, they encounter any obstacles that blacks encounter in America in terms of prejudice, right?
Right.
And yet you turn around and say, oh, but you're not really one of us. You're not entitled to the grievances that we have. And they might rightly feel they're kind of being cheated there because they actually are paying the price.
No, I agree with that. That's a bogus use of the word. And that is how it's used by some of the people like the KSFO, talk radio hosts who use it. So, yeah. No, I agree with that.
Okay.
Anyway.
And then you want to talk about Michael Gordon?
Did I succeed in having it both ways there? I think I did. I was offended by the fact that the New York Times upbraided its military expert Michael Gordon for going on Charlie Rose and daring to say that he thought the surge, might work, and we owed it to the Iraqis after screwing up the war so badly. It seemed to me one of the reasons you like Michael Gordon is because he knows more than the rest of us, and you want to hear what he has to say. And especially the ombudsman of the New York Times shouldn't be in the business of provoking censorship of Times reporters. It's not like Michael Gordon is going to stop thinking what he thinks. So let's hear it, and then we can analyze it.
Well,
you disagree?
Well, kind of. I mean, first of all, every analytical thing he's going to convey after saying, I think we should do this, he can convey anyway. And a perfect example of is John Burns, also on Charlie Rose, a week or two ago. Charlie Rose did a whole hour with him. It was evident that Burns is in favor of the surge. You could tell it by the way his analysis was leaning.
So why can't he say it?
But he just didn't say it. And from the point of view of the New York Times, I can see why they don't especially want him to come out and editorialize, because, that will undermine, whether rightly or wrongly, it will undermine trust. So in him as a reporter,
it means you read Michael Gordon's pieces and you know where he's coming from, and it gives the reader an additional analytic tool. It doesn't.
Well, but it actually leads certain ideological categories of readers to either doubt him or quit reading him. So I mean, as a practical matter, that's the prospect that the Times faces.
Let's pull the wool over their eyes.
What?
Let's pull the wool over their eyes and pretend that Michael Gordon and John
that's the other thing, Mickey. You say, well, there's value added in getting in people who have a bias, declaring it, and then everyone can read them with that in mind. But as a matter of fact, the people who are most inclined to be open about their bias are probably the reporters who are actually best at separating their bias from their reporting. So they're really the people whose bias you don't especially need to know, whereas the reporters who choose to claim they don't have a bias or not declare a bias are probably more likely to be deviously imposing their bias on their reporting. So basically, you're getting the full disclosure from exactly the people you don't need it from, I would say.
It's not,
and their credibility will suffer as a practical matter.
It's not only full disclosure. I want to know whether John Burns and Gordon support the surge. And I'm more certain of it if I actually hear them say it, because I actually wouldn't have necessarily guessed that about about Burns.
Did you have any doubt before the war that John Burns supported the Iraq War, Mickey?
No, but I think...
Right, and he never said it, right?
But since then, I would have doubts whether he supported the surge.
Well, now you've listened to this interview.
If you ran into him, that's the first question you'd ask him. The same way my friends who were reporting the war in Bosnia, the first question I'd ask him would be, what the hell should we do? You're not going to get an answer to that question sometimes unless you actually ask it.
You would have no doubts after this Charlie Rose interview, I submit. In fact, John Burns is starting to sound to me like he's drunk the Bush Kool-Aid. I mean, he, like a year or two ago, he was a couple years ago, he was saying things like, I'm starting to think this war could have never worked and so on. And he's really, you should listen to this interview. It's pretty much exactly what the Bush administration would want a person to say, but...
Well, saying the war was stupid, but you're for the surge is the courageous position that nobody's taking, except maybe
the war. That what? Well, actually, I oppose the war, but I have said to you that I'm not convinced that the surge couldn't be productive. Does that qualify? Do I win a Medal of Honor?
Absolutely. You and General Zinni and John Burns win the Medal of Honor.
Thank you,
but not Chuck Hagel. Well, anyway, so that was an interview. We actually disagreed on that. I was shocked. I'm shocked by that.
We disagree on everything. It's just that you always claim we don't when you see the wisdom of my views.
No, we don't disagree with everything.
You belatedly try to associate yourself with my views, Mickey.
This is an argument. It's mere refutation.
What?
This is an argument. It's mere refutation.
That's right.
We don't disagree. You're wrong.
You say refutation or reputation?
Refutation. That's an old Monty Python routine.
Oh, I see.
Sorry.
I was never a Monty Python guy.
Okay.
Which actually leads us into our next topic.
Okay.
Because I had a culturally underprivileged background. My parents did not watch Monty Python. That's just one example of how underprivileged it was. And I noticed in your blog, you ostentatiously note that you worked for Chicken Delight while in high school or something.
Right.
You're trying to flash these proletariat credentials.
No.
And it just reminds me of this thing you've been perpetrating, the spin you've been putting on your image ever since our argument about which of us was more like Felix and which of us was more like Oscar in The Odd Couple. And you said you were Oscar, and all our viewers agreed, which is just a tribute to how successful you've been in perpetrating this hoax.
That was the reflection that you were uptight and controlling.
No, but there's more to... I mean, Oscar is like Joe Lunchbucket, right?
Yeah.
He's a common person. He's one of the people.
I guess.
And to the extent that you succeed in convincing America that that's more you than me, you really have pulled the wool over their eyes, Mickey. And this Chicken Delight thing seems to me yet another tactic in this.
In America, being a man of the people doesn't have to do with class. It has to do with immersing yourself in the mass, mainstream, middle-class culture, which rich people and poor people do. I mean, the rich people who live, a few blocks away from here in the rich parts of the West Side, they all shop at Costco, like the same place as the hardworking working class maids and security guards. The Costco's a slightly
there's a difference.
Place,
there's a difference between the Walmart clientele and the Target clientele, Mickey.
And the Costco clientele. I agree, but there are plenty of poor people at Costco when I go there as in my lunch bucket-esque personality.
Yeah, this is when you're about to write this little Chicken Delight item and you want to beef up your credentials.
America, the class and being an ordinary person and believing in social equality isn't a function of your income. That's what's good about America, and you're trying to force everybody back into their little class boxes that you can't have worked at Chicken Delight if you grew up in Beverly Hills because you're rich. And if you claim that you learned something from it or you claim that you're an ordinary person, then you're just lying. No, in America, you're not lying. That's what America is.
I don't say you're lying. I mean, I should note that this is the line you take in your, in many ways, admirable book, The End of Equality.
That was condescending.
I think, you put more emphasis on this than many people would, because you think it's the reason we basically shouldn't worry about income inequality, because we have this social equality, and I really think you tend to exaggerate. I think, in many ways, there's less... I think the average upper-middle-class person has very little actual physical interaction with lower-class people in America. Less than before. But
they used to have tremendous interaction. These people were their maids.
Used to is the key well.
And there was a lot of interaction, but it was an egalitarian reaction. Now,
Well, I don't.
they have less interaction, but when they do interact, it's on a more egalitarian basis. And the basic problem with society is that nobody has interaction with anybody anymore. Not that the rich have no interaction with the poor.
Well, no, they have interactions with people who are functionally appropriate. There are fewer and fewer random encounters thanks to technology and some other things.
There are not very many class-mixing institutions. I agree. That's why I'm for having
right.
more.
Well, technological evolution is moving against your thesis.
That's true.
So, or against your hope.
That's true in a certain respect, yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, back to this whole posing that you're doing.
But why is I did work for Chicken Delight. Why is it posing that
What,
I mentioned
one
it
summer?
just because a buddy of mine made a movie of it, and
Exactly.
the movie is being played on Showtime tomorrow morning at 6:30 a.m. Eastern. The Chicken Chronicles.
Well, it's a little suspicious that one of your coworkers turns into a noted filmmaker, right? I mean,
Well, I didn't pretend that he was just an ordinary coworker.
How many summers did you work at Chicken Delight?
I worked there for about 3 or 4 weeks
3 or 4 weeks?
in my senior
What
year.
a fraud you are!
I'm
You
not
want to
a
hear
fraud.
something
I
about
didn't
my
say-
employment history in high school, Mickey?
I'm okay.
Summer after my junior year, I got my father to pull all the strings available to me, give me the best job he could. I painted houses for $1.80 an hour. Next summer, I worked at Pizza Hut. Summer after that, after my freshman year in college, I worked at Pizza Hut for $2 an hour. I had gotten a promotion relative to the last summer and yet failed to have the presence of mind to ask for a raise. So I win.
I'm playing my violin here.
No, but it just gets back to this Oscar thing, you know, and there was another moment on this that I failed to exploit when you conceded that you had gone to Las Vegas and not gambled. Is that Oscar-like behavior?
No, no, it's not Oscar-like behavior.
I see I've humiliated you. Now I'm starting to feel bad.
But I mean, the Felix Oscar thing was just sort of something that was imposed on me. I'm my own man. I'm not Jack Klugman. Or whoever, or Walter Matthau for that matter.
Well, anyway, you seem to be like looking for this Joe Sixpack profile, and I just wanted to do what I could do to.
No, bizarrely, this guy, the guy who was working with me at Chicken Delight in Beverly Hills was the son of I.A.L. Diamond, who wrote a lot of the great Walter Matthau movies. So there's
Wow, you did have it tough.
There's a hidden upper class connection here.
How'd you ever make it, Mickey? Starting out in a milieu like that.
It was rough. I grew up on the wrong side of the tracks in Beverly Hills, too. You know, there actually are tracks, and there's a right side and a wrong side.
Yeah, except there's no wrong side.
And I was on the wrong side. No, there is a wrong side.
Hey, I was on the wrong side in Midland, Texas, man. Literally.
I've been to Midland, Texas.
So once again, I win.
Yeah, you win. I wouldn't want to be on the wrong side. But, as you know, and we're moving to our next topic, I control the fate of American politics, according to a guy named Danny Finkelstein, who's a very nice guy who writes a blog for the Times of London, and implied incredibly misguidedly that I was somehow important in the American political scene.
Well, in particular, in shaping the fate of Hillary Clinton, right?
Yes. I mean, I think he's just a fan of the blog, and he extrapolates.
We had a list of most influential bloggers on this particular issue, and you were number one.
No, it was just specifically in terms of who could affect Hillary's candidacy.
Right.
And somehow if I decided that she wasn't neoliberal enough, that would hurt her. It was completely insane, but of course welcome. And then
I think he somewhat misgauges the qualitative nature of your constituency.
And then I was ragged on by actually a pretty funny blog named by T. Bog, who said that I couldn't even break a 20, much less Hillary Clinton's candidacy. And I was actually offended by that because it seemed to be an attack on my essential puissance as a human being. But then I realized he just meant that I was poor. He meant that I couldn't break a 20 and that I couldn't come up with change for a 20. And then it's pretty funny.
Kinda.
I'm sure you chuckled at my expense.
I'm chuckling now. You just can't see.
He had he even had a screenshot from Blogging Heads that painted me in an unflattering light.
Speaking of which, we've showed up on YouTube a couple of times by people. You might ask, how do they get a hold of a file they can put on YouTube? And actually, they could do it because they can download our video files, but that's not how they do it. They have taped with a camcorder their own computer screens and put them up on YouTube.
Wow.
One features you and Eric Alterman cutting out all of your interjections because the person agreed with Eric.
Right.
And another one features David Korn and Jim Pinkerton.
Wow.
We can link.
So they're like bootleg blogging heads being sold on street corners in India.
And yeah, China is just a wash. A wash in those DVDs.
Okay, well, we can bring Jack Valenti out of retirement to prosecute these people.
Is he still around?
Yeah, I think he's still alive. He lost his job.
About time. Okay, so what? Do you have favorite viewer comments?
Well, I just want to... There were two comments that I thought were good. I agree with them. First, there's a very smart post by a guy named Minder Bender, pointing out that he said it was okay to use rational racism, but that he should emphasize the ways in which rational racism can leave us all worse off, and pointing out that all this rational discrimination in housing policy can result in leaving blacks in a horrible position, so the law should lean against it. I agree with that. And there was also a person attacking you, Bob, petty bourgeois, attacking you for casting doubts on Petraeus' sincerity, pointing out that there is a tradition of, at least there was one general in the Union Army who resisted Lincoln's strategy and refused a commission, and actually had an impact that way. So I don't think necessarily that Petraeus was suckered into supporting a surge he doesn't agree with just by the prospect of an additional star.
Well, I don't know exactly what I said. If I said literally, which I doubt, that any general would say anything in order to get a promotion, I didn't mean that. What I definitely do mean is that if George Bush, wants a policy, wants to find a general that will support his policy, he can find one, and it may involve some opportunism on the part of the general.
He happened to find one who was a media darling and who sort of had its incredibly good reputation, and is the one guy who could tell him to go screw himself and still have a hugely prominent national role.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and Petraeus is definitely a very smart and articulate guy, and has a Princeton PhD.
Well, there you go. But you're a man of the people, so you don't care about those things.
I'm also an Army brat, so I'm actually an expert on the ways of the military, or at least as viewed from the eyes of a boy.
You were a threefer. This guy also said that you are the Mo of blogging heads, and I am the Curly. And I don't know what that means.
I've aspired to be Larry.
But you don't want to be Shemp, apparently.
No. Well, Shemp and Curly, neither one of them was full-time in the end, right?
I haven't the faintest idea.
What is Mo known for? Mo was like the leader of the group, right?
I don't know. I guess that's right, yeah.
He made the occasional error of judgment, perhaps, but he was the leader of the group.
No, I think they were complimenting you, but I was too busy delivering the hard scrabble world of Chicken Delight delivery in Beverly Hills to pay attention to the Three Stooges.
I know.
So,
you've transcended the circumstances of your origin, Mickey.
So anyway, I like those two emails. So those two reader comments. So more, please.
Well, the one comment I would, self-indulgently mention, just because it sustains this argument about my thesis about the moral direction of history, is Wolfgangus weighs in with a view that I think is very, very correct in saying, when you to acknowledge the humanity of a group of people, say you overcome prejudice by including an ethnic group in your kind of conception of humanity and attribute them full human rights and everything, says it occurs when your model of them becomes realistic enough that, despite your desire, it becomes impossible not to recognize their motives and actions as something you would do in similar circumstances. This really is the key. I mean, I think my conjecture is that the basic instinctive litmus test we give to people when we're trying to decide whether their actions are moral is, would I have done that in that circumstance? And, when you think about it, in a certain sense, the answer is, of course you would have. I mean, in other words, if you define their circumstance as being born with their genes and brought up in their environment, well, presumably, by a lot of models of human nature, including the kind of prevalent one in the social sciences and the behavioral sciences, yeah, by definition, you'd do what they do. And yet we all often conclude that actually we wouldn't. There would be something different if we were them. But that is the crucial variable. Now, he he seems to take my view to be one of kind of steady expansion of the moral compass. Like, more and more, we say more and more groups kind of pass this litmus test. We can see how we would do what they would do under, similar circumstances. I actually don't think it's steady at all. I think it's a very volatile situation. I mean, even on a day-to-day basis, somebody could be your best friend today, and most of the things they do, you say, yeah, I'd probably do something like that. It's okay. And then the next day, you're mad at them, and you're less lenient in your judgment. And that's the problem we face with kind of humankind, is that we're constantly juggling the degree to which we acknowledge the humanity of other groups. Or it's one problem.
Wasn't the neocon worldview based on a sort of acceptance that everybody's like us, and they all want the same things, and they're all gonna want give them a chance, and they will all be for capitalist democracies, and all we have to do is liberate them, and maybe there was too little appreciation of the otherness of other cultures.
I think that's true. I mean, that's what a realist would say, I think. I mean, certainly central to realism as a foreign policy view, or part of it, I think, tends to be the view that, look, different cultures are different. That does not mean that you would not do what they did if you grew up in their culture.
I mean, can you get inside the mind of a father who kills his own daughter because the daughter's been raped in an honor killing? I have trouble with that.
No, I can't. I can't. It's too far outside of my experience, and that's what makes it easy for me to condemn that. No, but.
And do you even want to understand that? Do you want to be in a position where...
I don't feel a compelling reason to, no. But as an academic intellectual exercise, I assume that if I were born with that guy's genes and grew up in that environment, I would do what he did, right? And I mean, the virtue of that kind of view is you say to yourself, well, since all people have basically the same genes in terms of the basic contours of human nature, if that view is true, and you want to change the behavior of people, look carefully at the circumstances, under which they're brought up and the circumstances in which they live.
Unfortunately, even though every page of Gray's Anatomy is the same for every person, there are increasing numbers of people who might challenge the view that the genetic mental structures of people are
well, at a fine
the
enough
same.
grain level, they might. But what I'm saying, and this is actually a good segue to what I would add to this post, is that I think the key determinant to whether you find yourself able to understand, to identify yourself with the perspective of somebody else, is whether you view yourself as being in a non-zero-sum relationship with them, whether you see them as potential collaborators or define them as enemies. I think that comes first, and that determines whether or not you tend to judge their behavior leniently or harshly. And I think that's a part of human nature that's true of everyone. That's why, if you want the world not to be full of anti-American terrorists, you have to arrange things so that people see their relationship with Americans as being potentially fruitful. And that's a very complicated thing. It's not easy to do at all, given where people stand right now, culturally and politically. But I think that's the goal.
But rebranding with Obama will help.
Well, it takes a lot of things. I mean, I think people have to look at the world economy, the engine of globalization, as something that they can get something out of, for example, because America is so strongly identified with that. I think it's a very complicated problem. I
was just trying to segue out because we've gone.
You should, because I've gone on long enough.
An hour and 8 minutes. I think
that's nothing compared to last week. But we should say that there is good news to which we will link, which is that there's actually some money behind blogging heads now.
Despite your hard-scrabble origins, you've been moving in the world of high finance.
And despite my capacity for actually sabotaging anything good that might happen to me, I mean, I don't know if you've ever been involved in putting together an investment package, but
I have not.
It can be turbulent. And especially if it involves me, that's all I will say. I was not always a source of stability, but somebody who is the lead investor, Bob Rosenkrantz, who auspiciously, I think, was also the first person to contribute to Brian Lamb's C-SPAN project. Bob is the what is the term? It has founder in it.
Angel.
No. Well, he is an angel. He's an angel investor, but
Seed. Seed.
I'm not leaving until I think of this. Brian Lamb is the founder.
Well, I'll see you, Bob. I'll just let our
Founding
viewers
chairman.
Look at you. Okay.
Founding chairman. That's it. And I think that's good, you know. I mean, it could have, you know, it's much better than like a porn king or something investing in your site.
What are you going? How are you going to use this money? We've hired somebody, right?
I've already spent it. No, I haven't. We have hired Brian Degenhardt, our first full-time employee. And as we said last time, we are hiring some part-time people for the time being. Some of those positions could conceivably become full-time. And there's this nice piece in the Huffington Post about this whole thing.
It's weird. I think
that we should link to.
I agree. It was a very nice piece and actually made us sound interesting. And I agree we have potential for growth. In general, I have this. I'm coming upon this view of the web where I think things have sort of reached their level. I'm not sure, barring a huge international expansion of the web, of readership of American things, that my blog is going to grow that much, or that even Slate is going to grow that much. I mean, Slate is. If you look at the Slate homepage, I had this thought. If you look at the Slate homepage yesterday, it was really good. I mean, it had everything. It had sex, it had NASCAR, it had an analytic piece, it had a highbrow piece. I mean, I don't see how Slate's going to do better than that. So if it should be able to make money doing what it's doing, because I'm not sure that there's that much room for better things. But maybe I'm just short-sighted.
So does this make you a doubter about Blogging Heads as well?
No, because Blogging Heads has headroom.
Because if you go on the record as being a doubter, that will only increase my motivation.
No, I think.
No, go ahead. Come on, go on record.
No,
let's hear it.
No, if we had 2 or 3 of these things up every day with different people and you know, a whole panoply, a constellation of Blogging Head superstars, you know, there's a lot of room to grow.
So more content, you think, should be part of the model?
Especially, yeah, and people more with hair like mine, I think. Joel Stein hair.
We're going to have a whole section.
You got to have hair. Okay.
For that.
No, I was just spouting off at random. Sorry.
No, we'll take that as doubt. And now I've got even more fire in my belly.
Okay. Well, good, because you know, coming from the wrong side of the track.
The hardscrabble origins, yes, have left me. You know, that is a good point, though, Mickey. I maintain it is. As for the long-standing question of whether you are a true liberal and really identify with like liberal causes and the Democrats, and of course my view is kind of to be skeptical on that point. I do think it matters where you stood in the power structure when you grew up, and I wouldn't emphasize income levels so much. I mean, I think you could be almost at any high school and either be alienated from the power structure or be part of it. But you were like part of the power structure at your high school, right? Weren't you president of the senior class or something?
I was president of the student body, Bob.
Oh, were you? Well, that's interesting. You were the establishment candidate. Whereas I moved around all the time, and so was always entering new schools at the bottom of the power structure, and so I sympathized with liberal causes. And I think that's what it all boils down to.
If you say so, I mean, it seems to me that high schools are the last democracy where there isn't all that much having to do with class.
That's exactly the view of someone who stands at the top of the hierarchy and whose interest it is to promulgate that vicious myth.
No, that's the view of John Sayles in his greatest movie.
It is?
With the one with...
Doesn't sound like him.
Okay. I forget what it is. It's the one about high school.
The Return of the Secaucus 7?
No, it's after that. It's the one with Roseanne Arquette.
Okay.
It's really good. Okay.
Final note on that, final obscure transition. You sent me the music of Rosie who?
Rosie Thomas.
It's fine music, but she is to Regina Spektor, okay, as Judy Collins is to Joni Mitchell.
You're crazy. You're not listening to the lyrics.
Sorry.
They rip your heart out.
I'm not budging from that position.
Okay, well, you're a cultist. You're a crazed Regina Spektor cultist. You're beyond hope and reason. Okay.
We should go now.
Okay. See you later.
See ya.
Bye.